Retail suppliers are under huge strain and it could hurt everyone. Stores are open, but vendors face longer payment terms and financial uncertainty, which could hit retail shelves just as the holidays ramp up at the end of the year. The retail supply chain, like the retail industry itself, has gone through a dramatic period of stress since March. The early months of the COVID-19 crisis brought ubiquitous order cancellations. Almost as pervasive were retailers' efforts to push out payments for shipments. In turn, the cash flow crisis in retail hit suppliers just as hard. Businesses furloughed employers, negotiated with landlords and other vendors, and wondered if they would be able to stay in business, just as retailers did. A warm welcome to Spotlight from the Institute of Risk Management. I'm Jeremy Maggs. This is a new series talking to experts from the field and how they are not only handling the crisis, but also planning for the future. Berenice Francis from the Motus Corporation is Corporate Affairs Executive and Head of Risk and Sustainability. Berenice, a very warm welcome to you, and this is where I want to start. At what point, as someone who manages risk within your organization, did you know this was not only a black swan event, but as some have said, a killer black swan?
Sure. So Jeremy, to be honest, we were watching COVID quite early because of our operations in China. So we were fortunate we were getting first-hand accounts of not just what was happening in Wuhan, but our operations in Shanghai. And Shanghai went into lockdown around January, and we were having discussions regarding should we be sending any of our people across, because we also have OEMs who sit in the East that we visit quite regularly. So we had put a bit of a travel ban in place for all our people from January, and then we were watching to see, what the impact would be. And to be honest, we were looking at it first as a supply chain issue. How do you get product out to the East? How do we ensure that it doesn't disrupt us as much? Then it started being a health issue regarding, we were getting reports out of it. We were quite we started reasonably early with communication to our staff. We started in February already in terms of what is COVID, etc. And then when it really hit us from March, we put our crisis committee in place already.
Okay, we'll get to the crisis management in a moment. But difficult, I imagine, to balance supply chain imperative on the one hand, but also making sure that it's done in a safe health environment.
Agreed.
How did you do that?
The operations that we have looked at what the impact would be for their businesses first. So it was about moving product. I think, and that's what the supply chain view was. Could we get product reliably and safely out of the East and ensure it doesn't impact on our operations in South Africa or anywhere else? The health issue really became when it now hit the rest of the world. And I must admit, we already started getting feedback from people in terms of the concerns in our dealership group from early March. And we had to have very clear communications around, that's why we were able to send out those messages to staff, say, what is it? What is the impact? Because there was a lot of misinformation because no one knew.
Were you working off the back foot, or did you have a risk plan in place that took into account something like this?
Not adequately. No one did. I think when we looked at, so what we did do in March was, it was very imperative for us to look at our business continuity plans. So we had business continuity plans, and the way we've structured our BCPs is we don't necessarily look at what the incident is, we look at what's the impact on our businesses. So it was reasonably easy to adapt to say, if you look at categories, whether it's impact on people, your premises, your processes and your systems, then you said, how will this specific matter impact? And then we realigned our business BCPs to adapt for pre-COVID or the lockdown, and then what would it mean in lockdown?
Looking back, were there huge gaps in your risk planning? Where could you have done things better?
I don't think there's no blueprint. What you have to have is a process that's adaptive, and you have to have people on the ground and at the different levels of your business who can adapt to that and who understand their businesses well enough to understand how to operate under different contexts. So, as I said, and it's something that we very clearly communicated, not just to our businesses, but to the market, to say, no one's gone through this specific event, but let's look at where we have had instances where we've had delays or where we couldn't run and we had to consider business continuity issues.
Did you feel, and I guess are you still feeling, that your voice is being sufficiently heard, that the concept, the discipline of risk management is now being taken a lot more seriously?
So I think at first it depends on the context of the organization. One of the reasons why I enjoy what I do in our organization is because it's always been understood that risk is everyone's responsibility, that to run a business, you need to manage risk. My role in the organization is to ensure that we're consistent, that we have consistency in our frameworks, and that we have monitoring of specifically what we're doing and how we're managing our actual risk responses. And during COVID, my voice was very much heard, as well as every other executive, because you have to, when you have such an impactful event or black swan event, you can't operate in a silo. Every executive needs to play their role because we need to integrate our response. So it was an opportunity for risk. If you're in an organization where you possibly felt that your voice wasn't being heard, this was the opportunity, this was the time to step up.
How do you integrate?
How do you integrate? You need to understand your business. You need to understand the maturity of the leaders in your business, and you also need to know what their key pain points are. And as risk consultants or as risk, we in an extremely advantageous position to help. We're not audits, we're not compliance. We really are there to help them manage their business risk better. And if you can't be there in a crisis, you need to have been there before. You build up goodwill before the crisis. So when the crisis does happen, they do turn to you.
How did the tone of your communication change?
Yeah.
Because you needed to articulate, you still need to articulate, we're far from over when it comes to this crisis. You need to articulate the reality of what is happening. But on the other hand, you can't be shrill, you can't be doomsayers.
What was quite important, so in our group, we don't usually communicate from the top down. Because we're an umbrella organization, we have many brands and many divisions within the broader group. So we actually changed the way we communicated during COVID. We started communicating a lot more frequently from the top down, and the tone needed to be with empathy because everyone was concerned and you couldn't be dismissive. Because, when COVID started, we had a lot of feedback regarding, well, it's essentially the flu. And you've got to manage the symptoms, and you had to empathize with people who did take it a lot more seriously than the flu. So you couldn't be dismissive. And that changed how we communicated in the sense that we had to be realistic and not create fear and give and empathize with where people were at the time.
But you've got to manage the empathy against productivity, haven't you?
Sure.
Because a lot of people saw the gap here, that they see this as an opportunity to not be as productive as they should be. Again,
it comes back to your culture. So our organization is very performance driven. The retail sectors can't afford not to be. In the motor industry particularly, we're very performance driven because we're very transparent about exactly how many cars you sell. There's no hiding behind a non-disclosure. And because of that, the nature and the way we operate tends to be very objective, very performance driven, and it's a self-motivating factor for most of our people. So the balance regarding giving people the opportunity to decide for themselves what they needed to do versus productivity, there's an immediate impact or consequence if you're not productive. So if you're not going to make targets in terms of selling cars, etc., there is a direct impact on people's commission structuring, for example. So it was something that we had to factor in going into lockdown. How do we balance that?
I want to get some thoughts from you about where the retail space finds itself right now, but I want to just finish the bigger risk picture if we can. As you continue to manage this, what remains your biggest worry?
So what we worry about is we're obviously worried about the economic impact. So for us, we first monitored very much from a supply chain impact, then the health impact on our people, and what was the economic impact of the of lockdown, particularly for us, because we were not allowed to trade. And we know that the consequences of the decisions we made will impact people now. So things like people are under a lot of financial pressure, our people are under a lot of financial pressure. We've had to look at restructuring our businesses because there's a reality about what the market looks like, and we can't wait to do that. So that's my biggest concern in terms of now. And then lots of people talk about, and we talk when we say black swan. You know, I think it was Nicholas Taylor who coined that phrase. He also has a book where he speaks about being anti-fragile, because a lot of people talk about being resilient. You know, you've got to be resilient through this, and while that's fine, you know, I've always grappled with what does resilience mean, and resilience essentially means you kind of bounce back. I love the phrase being anti-fragile, because it's about being more than resilient. It's about how do you get stronger because of the circumstances, and what have we learned about COVID to look at where we were fragile and build on that, because now that we've got this experience, how do we do better?
Okay, to the retail industry now itself, and particularly the bloodbath that has extended across all sectors. How's your approach to management changed because of this? Because in many respects, you're still operating in survival mode. Has your philosophy changed?
One thing that was very clear before we even started implementing our strategies around how do we survive is we were very clear around what this would mean. We also have a very experienced, we've been around for 70 years, you know, in the motor industry in South Africa. We were around with the 2007 leading up to the impact 2008 and 9 on the industry, where essentially the industry reduced by about 40%. And we've never recovered pre those levels. So we've kind of seen what these huge events do to a business like ours. And we knew running up, what should we be preparing for? What scenarios should we be thinking through? And when COVID started and when the discussion in the South African context started around lockdown, we had an EXCO meeting, and we very clearly said we need to align to our values. You know, what are the key values we need to hold on to and live, and so all the decisions we do need to align to the values that we espouse. So if we say we want to make sure that our people are safe, we need to live with that. We need to know what the consequences of our actions are, and that's going to take you through whatever COVID happens. You know, whatever the bloodbath happens. We also need to ensure that we're sustainable to all our stakeholders. And responsible to all our stakeholders. So those type of values you set up front, because ultimately you'll be judged on the decisions you make. And if you hold on to those core values, you can be as transparent as you can.
And you've got to keep revisiting that almost on a daily basis to make sure that you're holding to that. Because a lot of those are very lofty ideals, easy to engage with in good times, but in bad times you've really got to cling on to something. The relationship with your clients in terms of risk, how has that changed?
What we also did was a lot of our importers extended warranties, because we said, you know, what does it mean for our clients who are now not using their cars and the impact? So we needed to be consistent in the same way that you needed to be consistent with being available, reliable, ensuring that the same service, irrespective of what your internal issues may be, you need to ensure that the client expectation cannot be faulted, because clients remember, and they remember the service. And look, we'll be the first to admit we don't get it right all the time. But when things happen, how do we respond? How do we correct it? And how do we ensure that whatever service we deliver to a customer ensures they come back to us? because again, we're not building a business today. We've been around for a long time, and we'd like to be around for many more years. And that's what ensures continuity and sustainability, is that the person who buys a car or services a car from you one day comes back to your network and ensures that they're constantly coming back.
What do you think the motor sector is going to look like in 12 months' time?
So, we're part of the broader IRMSA, and I know that their forecast year on year is that the motor sector will be about 30% down come December. Based on our experience, as I said, with 2008, it takes a long time for the motor industry to recover. People need to, the positive sentiment as we're going, as we're easing lockdown, as people are feeling a little bit more certain about what COVID means to them from a health perspective, as they start trusting the health sector that if they do get sick, they can go out, that sentiment needs to translate into us consuming. The motor industry is a predictor to a certain extent of sentiment, and we need people to now, there needs to be a little bit of a contagion of that sentiment to, are we going to now buy things and durable goods? So I do think that we need to be realistic. The motor sector will take at least 18 months. But having said, to recover to pre-COVID levels, but having said that, coming into the year, we were about 5-10% down. So we already had a bit of a bleakish outlook coming into COVID. And what we've always said to people, COVID happened, but we still have risks that were there before COVID. We still had structural issues that were there before COVID. All COVID did was maybe refocus us, refilter us. But we need to fix our structural issues to get beyond COVID, I would think.
As a risk professional, personalize this for me. How has your job and your life changed?
COVID's made it, it has made us more relevant as a professional. We did add, we became a lot more visible in organizations from a communications perspective, from a sounding board perspective. We need to leverage that and continue that. And we need to ensure that we don't lose out on the opportunity that we've created. All those, I spoke somewhere else one day and I said what we've become is a chief connector, because we see the whole organization and we can connect not just horizontally but vertically. So we should become the chief connectors.
Berenice Francis from the Motus Corporation, Corporate Affairs Executive and Head of Risk and Sustainability. Thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate your time. Just a reminder of this year's annual IRMSA conference. It is in digital form this year, and the theme, Seeing a Risk Intelligence Future. It is on the 30th of September and the 1st of October, and the details are on your screen. And thank you for watching Spotlight.